Hello and welcome to DevRel Radio, the podcast where we tune in into the heart of developer relations. I'm your host, Oli, and I'm joined today by Baruch
Hey,
and Victor.
Hey, how you doing?
In our previous episode, we discussed the misconception of return on investment in the developer relations. And we mentioned someone who came today as a guest, and that's
Steve Pousty.
So internet knows him as a Steve Zero for many years. Yeah, I came to know the Steve when he was still in kind of like a computing infrastructure. He was one of the developer advocates in the power of Red Hat to bring the OpenShift into the world. I attended his workshop that when he was talking about OpenShift before OpenShift was Kubernetes. So there was a time. Remember those times?
the dead thing that people try to rebrand as Kubernetes and it didn't work because it's not Kubernetes, but it's some dead thing instead. Yeah.
No, that wasn't it. So actually, this is an interesting point for advocates. I don't know if people will run into this, but we had the old product, which was kind of based on containers, right? Containers have been around for a really, really long time. Change root jails are containers, right? So containers have been around for forever. We were in competition primarily with Heroku on the hosted side, and then with Cloud Foundry on the install side. And we weren't getting the traction we wanted. And one of the lead architects / engineers at that time, who's now the CEO of Red Hat, but at that time he was an architect engineer, said, "Oh, we met with these Docker guys, and they really love the kernel. And so we're going to go, containers are huge. We're going to go all in on containers." And then I went to the first DockerCon, and I was the demo guy for our talk. And I showed we were working on something that wasn't Kubernetes yet. It was like some sort of our own container. And the Google people saw it and said, "Hey, we're working on this thing that we're about to open source called Kubernetes. You want to be in on it?" And so, wrap that up. The hard part for the engineers was it took a while for them to get Kubernetes ready. So we knew that the product was no longer going to be the old thing. But we couldn't show or talk anything about the new thing. And when developers can't show, or developer advocates can't show or talk, Baruch, how do they become? Grumpy. Very, very grumpy.
There's a very good documentary. I will put this in the show note that talks story about Kubernetes. If you're into this type of jazz, and it also talks about how the Red Hat came together with the Google, and they were start working. It was one of the great success stories of open source collaboration within huge vendors. Usually historically, it's very difficult to collaborate, and for the many years, it was kind of like, okay, will it work?
Yeah, like we're all from the JDK world, right? Like how when vendors were trying to collaborate on the JDK, miserable.
Yeah. And the first iteration ended up with some lawsuits and stuff like that, but it turns out to be okay. We are right now doing good. In the previous episode, we touched the topic about it's an everlasting topic in the DevRel community, metrics, and how we're gonna be reporting on success of this DevRel organization. And I immediately remembered one of the talks that I was
it
highly
wasn't you,
inspired.
don't lie.
I remember, but Baruch vocalized it. So I always remember things, but he has a faster reaction on certain things. He can vocalize this and verbalize this faster.
Because I'm younger.
Baruch? Yeah, go ahead.
That's because I'm younger.
Younger, okay.
Generally, I think if I go back all the DevRel conferences that Matthew did, and I hope we'll keep doing, I think if I need to name one talk, which is my absolute favorite of all times, that would be ROI as a Trap. Because it was so on point. It was something that all of us think. None of us kind of had the guts to go ahead and say it. And it was also delivered absolutely hilariously. I laughed my butt off. That's a great talk.
And also, it was very timely because I remember at some point in our DevRel life, we start paying a lot of attention how to measure our success, because we start getting the questions about okay, so how we can explain what you're doing here. And this is where the Steve came onto the stage and talk about this. Steve, what was the inspiration, first of all? Did you also feel that it was timely? And something that needs to be saying about this?
It was timely. Like it's like it was somewhat the beginning of the metric stuff, and I still see it happening till this day, though, which is the sad part. Like we as a profession haven't gotten to the part where we've gotten some really good metrics together that we like engineers do, right? Like they struggle with how do you measure engineer productivity, right? But nobody has a problem with that. They don't do ROI for engineers, right? They don't say like, oh, well, we put snacks in the break room. Let's do the ROI on snacks in the break room. Or we're not going to buy Windows laptops. We're going to buy everybody Mac laptops. Did anybody do any ROI calculations on that? Or there's all sorts of things. Like you can even go up to the executives and say like, well, executives get to fly in first class. Have you done a ROI on first class versus sitting in normal class? Cattle class, as I like to call it.
How about offsite location? Anyone did ROI on what location works best for offsite? I bet a shitty airport hotel will come first in terms of ROI. Anyone does offsite in a shitty airport hotel? Well, I did, but except of JFrog.
I mean, I'm sure that would be. So I was getting really frustrated because part of it came up. Online advertising became more and more part of developer relations programs, right? Like we don't actually run it, but there's that team that's trying to optimize ad spend and get people to look at our platform, and they can come up with very clear metrics, right? Like they have metrics like how many click-throughs did I get? How many did go to this? They can track the person really easily. And they were because they could do that, people were putting pressure on the advocates like, okay, well, what are we getting out of you guys for the same amount of money? And should we spend more on ads? Right. And so that's where I was getting really frustrated because it's not an appropriate metric or return on investment. This is the other thing I don't like. I see it only really applied to DevRel, sometimes to marketing, but really mostly to DevRel, where I see in the developer world.
I think that the reason is because we are so expensive, right? Especially the travel budget, right? So no one cares about the peanuts. So when it is peanuts, when it's like whatever marketing campaign, like you spend $12 for clicks, no one is going to come after that. But when it comes to travel, people start to, okay, that's 100K. Why? Right, and those questions didn't start with DevRel. It actually started with field marketing, with conferences. But they actually can provide an ROI, right?
Yes.
Because they have measurable leads, they have the conversion, they show the numbers. We went to DevNexus, 100K in ARR, easy.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, who else goes to conferences? Oh, developer advocates. Okay, do that. Do what they did.
Exactly. So the point that the Steve made about the marketing, it's understandable because they need to influence the pipeline, and salespeople know, and they can see how a particular event can be converted into something that would turns out as opportunity, and after that it will end up as a deal, hopefully, and things like that. How to deal with this DevRel thing, how to measure this conference talk that Baruch traveled and then gave to places where no one was there. Or
so that's the thing. Like for events, it's hard, and it's gonna have to be kind of I think it's hard, and I think it has to be kind of a gut thing, and you have to be, as a professional, put aside your feeling that Postgres. What is it? What's the one in Ibiza? Yeah, it's Postgres Ibiza. Like, yeah, I would really like to go, but I'm not really going to get much sales out of that one, right? Like, you have to actually say that's not a good event for us, because you only see our effects farther down the pipeline without direct connection to us. So Baruch was at that show that 10 people showed up for, and then he worked the booth, and then he talked to a couple people in the booth who thought it was interesting, and then he gave a workshop, and 3 people started using it, and then one of those people worked for Ford Motor Company, went back to Ford Motor Company, said, wow, this is great. I tried this. They start spreading it around the engineering team. And then either our salespeople call in to Ford and they say, we're doing this, and then they go to their engineering team and say, hey, we're getting a sales call from and what do you think of their product? And they're like, oh, that's awesome. We already love it. Or they actually love it so much that they actually go to their managers and say, hey, we really want this product, right? But nobody's going to say, It's because I talked to Baruch in the booth at whatever it's going to be, and you can't track it. There's no way. Like Baruch, I remember you trying it one time for like putting up those URLs at the end of the show to try to get
No,
people
I
to click
still
through.
doing it. I still do it, and I still track it, but I track something else. So now here's the problem. Even if someone figures out that that deal was because Baruch went and spoke and blah blah blah, it actually makes it worse. It makes it worse because it's a $2,000 deal. You spend $5,000 on travel, and now there is a number that can be anchored to use against you and say, hey, that is not enough.
Yeah, where the
Now,
majority
Yeah.
of your effort actually could not be tracked, and they don't really know if
yeah, so you see, not having a number, it's almost easy because you can say, okay, we cannot measure, this is why, blah blah blah, and your boss might say, okay, that makes sense. It's a leap of faith. We won't measure the ROI. Instead, we will measure for improve, and this is where my methodology with show notes works and what's not, and you forget about the whole thing. But if you have this number, but you now not only you need
Right.
to prove that this number is irrelevant and it's like 1% or it's 10% and you don't know what to say, actually having a bad metric is worse than not having a bad metric at all.
And another problem with metrics is
Yeah.
that once you start capturing certain metrics and you keep accountable, you become accountable for those metrics, you start optimizing this work.
wrong incentives bring wrong actions.
Exactly. Yeah. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Exactly. And in this case, it kind of
Yes.
it becomes dread because you start thinking not about the inspiring people or about how to make money out of those people. And this is not the part of the job. You're not in sales. You're selling idea, in my opinion. You're selling like something big and tangible. What's the alternative metrics we would rather need to capture, Steve?
So I really do want to say something about a single metric as being because I've actually, when I've interviewed with companies, they said their metric was net promoter score. And I was like, are you kidding? Like net promoter score is your one metric for how your DevRel program is doing? That's like the worst metric. The problem with saying one metric, it's like trying to assess the health of a person by saying, I took their temperature, and it was okay, so they must be fine.
I think they do that in ER.
Yeah, they take your temperature, they put the blood oximeter on you, they take your blood pressure, they're going to take a blood sample and then go run the chemistry on it, right? Because human beings, and I don't think that DevRel is necessarily as complicated as human health, but I do think it's more complicated than, hey, here's one metric to capture everything that we do, and it's going to be an valid symbol. So I think the idea of when people say we can boil it all, but if you were going to pick one metric, I'm not blaming you, Victor, because I've heard it a bunch of times in interviews. If you could boil it down to one metric, what metric would you pick? And I always go, I can't pick just one. Well, it depends on the phase of the product, because usually people say, oh, you give out swag just to get signups, and they're just giving out swag to get signed. Well, sometimes that's exactly what you need to do in a DevRel program, right? Like if your product is new and you're going against some big competitor who already has a community, you're going to need to be able to say, when you want to go up against them in talks and articles and stuff, you're going to need to be able to say, oh, our developer ecosystem is 5.5 million people, right? And the clearest way you can get people to sign up is say, hey, I'll give you a t-shirt if you sign up, right? And so in the early phases, that can be one of the good metrics that you want to do.
And it's called developer acquisition cost. And that's very valuable metric, and it's a very valid metric, I would say, right? So you still need to know, if you try to bring people to a platform, how much does it cost to bring new people?
Again, it only works for a certain acquisition methods, right?
Yep.
So if you give someone a
SaaS.
t-shirt for people to sign up, then you have a price. You travel to this conference, plus the cost of t-shirts divides by the number of signups or whatever. But what you do, what we all do now is a part of the developer acquisition, because they come, they listen to the show, and they're like, oh, those are great guys. Let's check. Oh, Star Tree. What is Star Tree on this t-shirt? Let me Google it. Boom. Next thing you know, someone signed up. You have no idea how much.
And so this is why.
And we don't know, we have no idea that they sign up through this podcast, right? And ever, not necessarily today.
And you also won't get it from a talk. You won't get it from a workshop, right? You might be able to get it from a blog post, although even then, that's another like down the line one. Like they may come read the blog post, then read a bunch of other stuff, and then 3 weeks later come and actually the blog post is the thing that triggered them to sign up, and there's no way you can track it. So there are some metrics you can do, and that's why also you need multiple metrics, right? So because we're pointing out things that wouldn't get captured by that cost per developer acquisition cost if you just focused on handing out swag at an event.
Marketing is easier to measure, period. What can we do? And the problem is that there are a lot of people that will ask the questions, hey, if they can be measured, why can't you? And this is exactly the trap that we're talking about.
Yeah, but anything
Yes.
other, let me ask you a
Yes.
question though. Anything other than online marketing where you can actually get a verified signal on what you did, can they really evaluate how it worked? Like when they buy a New York Times full page ad, how will they know the impact of that New York Times full page ad, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about billboards in SF. They're everywhere, but then how do you measure it?
Billboards on the Times Square.
Yeah, no, but we're talking about developer marketing. Although billboards on 101 in San Jose,
Yeah.
I have no idea why they decide to do it and how they measure. I have no idea what's
It's
the ROI
probably
on that and
vanity.
how do
It's
they measure
probably
that.
kind of like, because I can type of thing.
Well,
And also I want to be
I don't
vocal
think
about
so.
this and loud.
I actually think it has something to do with why they have developer advocates in the first place, which is what you're trying to do is build a community of people and you want your community to seem like a good place to be or the
Right.
hot place to be. Like when Mongo was around, everybody had to be part of Mongo. You needed to have, what are you doing with Mongo? Blah, 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 right? And they had generated really good buzz around their product. And that helped them to build a community, helped to build their valuation, helped with all sorts of stuff. So that part of what I don't know that it's necessarily a good spend for billboard.
One of the things that Twilio did this exactly like a similar approach with their early stuff, like building community and the people who use their app. They start teaching JavaScript, and as example of this JavaScript application, they showing how you can send SMS or how you can have a like real-time notification. It's a good it's easy to it's easier to measure is right now because since we're doing a lot of things online, we can capture a lot of things online. But again,
yeah, no, JavaScript training, I get it why they do it, I get it how it convert, but they also have a billboard on 101. How do they measure that? And they also sponsor DevRel. How do they measure that?
Right. And so maybe one of the things is, as we're thinking out loud about this, because it's really hard to think of good quality metrics. Maybe one of them is more metrics around community rather than specific like
awareness,
like long-term trends towards your community. Yeah, awareness, community. Then you have to figure out, again, though, so in the end, it's not a simple question. In the end, no matter what, it's not a simple question because it depends on the state of your product, right? If you're a startup, you're not going for how much money am I getting per user. You're getting how many users can you get signed up and am I getting publicity? But then the startup doesn't want to stay that way forever because as the product gets mature and they've been on the market, the investors or them are going to start saying, okay, well, how much money are you making now? Right? How did you turn that into money? And so then you need a different set of metrics. And so I tend to think of it more like human health. Right.
You have a different metrics throughout the life of the. So, for example, when you're young, you're probably not monitoring your cholesterol much. But when you go into more respectful age, you need to start monitoring this type of things. I think this is the also
more respectful ages.
Is it also thing with the DevRel metrics? Don't you think?
Yeah, well, we're in the colonoscopy era now.
Yeah. So I think we should leave some room for peer pressure because I feel like a lot of people put their billboard because others do that or run their own conference because others do that. Look at that, like I don't know, Confluent do their current conference, then Startree will do their RTA summit, whatever,
fantastic
and then
point.
I'm starting my own company, and I need my blah blah blah
So
like B
that's
I
summit
mean,
that could
get
be a
Java
This
very
Punk
is
was a
good
this
perfect.
is
that would be a
fine.
very good topic for
We are
one of the future episodes. But I really want to like stay on the metrics topic. So like one of the metrics.
Yeah, but wait, I
well.
want to say
Let
she's no, she's right about this because she's one of the metrics is how many shows do I do and why am I doing this show? And
Yeah.
we've all been in the Java community for a really long time. And if IBM didn't show up to the Java show, even if they don't get anybody converted, but if they didn't show up to the Java one, that was a huge like that. Everybody would be like, "Oh my gosh, are they pulling out of the
Yeah.
Java market? What are we doing?" Like that's like there's certain shows you have to be at if you're in. And again, that's community,
Right.
right? Like I am part of this community, and me showing up is part of that community, and you're doing it for that reason. I mean, I think in certain ways, like if you think that developer advocacy is directly going to drive profit, I think that is a false notion. I think they will eventually drive profit.
That
To say
was the
developer
that was the
advocacy-
essence of this talk, like return of investment and kind of like, or like if it will ever will drive the profit. Is it like this is not the right way to think about DevRel? And one of the
Right.
one of the ways how there was like running jokes between like some of my friends who followed me, and every time when I was doing this type of shows, some of the shows that I was doing in the countries where we didn't have any interest of doing any type of shows, like I did a lot of conferences in Russia because like originally I'm from Russia, and like there's a huge the following circle of people who follow things what we do. And I did the conference there, but we not sell to Russian developers directly. There was no representation there. There was no license sale. But lots of people in these regions, in Eastern European regions, they work as a consultants in the offshore companies, and they can influence some of the things. This is not possible to measure. How you can like measure influence? And the running joke was about how soon Victor will start talking about Kafka. And I thought about this as a joke, but also I watched one of the Steve's talks that I would like to touch in this episode a little bit. And I was like, okay, so what about I will turn this joke into something that I actually can measure. And this is how this TTK metric came up to be, time to Kafka. Like how fast I can start talking about Kafka in the conversation about certain problem that people have, or how faster people can get Kafka running. This metric also evolved into time to conk when I was at conk. Now probably it will be evolved with something in time to Pinot or something like that. And the reason why this metric for me was important, because I spent a lot of time in a so-called valley of despair. And Steve probably will get some like flashbacks, like what he's talking about. He was presenting this. I was trying to remember like the color of the shirt that was kind of like also like a Hawaiian shirt or something like that.
Oh my gosh, it was. Well, I think it was the one for ROI. I think that was my designer Japanese shirt. Like I'm really cheap with clothes, and I don't think clothes should cost anything more than what I used to pay for them back in like 1987, 1988. And like I'm shocked. And my fiance, she designs clothes and shoes and stuff, and so she's like, $200 is not a lot for a shirt. And I was like, what? And so for the longest, exactly. And so for the longest time, I was like, no. And then we took both of our families to Japan, and I went into one of these like designer houses, and I saw that shirt, and I was like, that's a shirt I want to give a keynote in. Like that's a keynote shirt, or that's a big talk shirt. So I spent, I think about $200 on that shirt, but I love it. But I don't wear it that much because I don't want to. I always get food all over me. But I love that shirt. And the other one I think was one I got in The Haight in San Francisco at a consignment shop. It was like, it's one of those polyester 70s, big collar, but lots of color on it shirt. I would not wear, I'm not into Hawaiian shirts. Sorry.
And the talk was
got to clear that.
Kick-ass curve. And also, I never seen anyone take this very interesting and very analytical approach for the problem. And I also, that time, I knew Katie Sierra as an author of the Head First, the Java books, but I never knew that like she has like a very awesome product book. And the Valley of Despair, how it was like, I don't remember verbatim because it might be like a Mandela effect or something like that coming into me. But I really like how you phrase that. And every adoption of the product comes through the certain stages. And generally speaking, our mission of DevRel needs to help people to start quicker and help them to go through this valley of despair where you have no idea what is going on and what to do with this. You have a problem to solve. And somebody told you that, Kafka will be the solve, or Conk will be the here, or it can be like Artifactory or the Gradle or something else. And they start digging. And they are in mud, they are in blood, and this is where we come into them, like giving the hand and trying to get them out of this mud, take this off and take them out of Valley of Despair where it can start, doing something productive. And this is where I think my idea crystallized.
The Valley of Despair is something a little different. You're talking about the suck threshold. So if you can visualize in your mind, this is not for you, this is for the listeners, because I mean, you can go see the talk and then you can see it more directly.
You can find the link in the description below.
Okay,
and so while it's a logistic curve, just like a thumbs up for this episode, and subscribe. Don't forget.
The logistic curve is one of those curves that starts slowly, goes linear, and then peaks and kind of goes off, right, like this, and then just that you're done with it. And that's the kick-ass curve, right? And so time is on the bottom, like how much time, like where you are in your evolution, and how competent you are is on the y-axis, right? And so the idea is, when you first start, there's two lines across. One is the suck threshold, below which you feel like you suck and the world is terrible and I'm a terrible developer and this product is miserable and everything's bad. And then you go, so that's at the beginning in that low area where you're starting to go rapidly up. The middle is normal everyday development. And then when the kick-ass threshold is at the top, that's where the name, the kick-ass curves come from. That's when you're like, I show up, I turn on my computer and I just start coding. And someone comes to me, asks me a question, and I give them the exact right answer. And I'm seen as the expert, and my life is good, and I love everything, and I love being the expert. And so,
you call this out in the flow state. You can easily go into flow state with the tool. You're not distracted. You just like do the thing.
Yeah. You're not like going again, like, okay, how does reflection work in Java again? Like, I don't remember. And then you have to go. You can just say, oh yeah, reflect. This is a reflection use case. So the one that you're talking about is that suck threshold, right? That's where we want to get people up. Our job is to get people up and out of that suck threshold as fast as possible, right? Because they feel miserable there, and if they can't get to the part of the next part of that line, they're never going to get to all the power and features in your product. And this is where you usually DevRel comes up against engineering and product managers, because they want to spend, they're talking to customers, which is usually the product managers, or they love the code that they write and they want to make their product really, really powerful, the best at whatever, blah, 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 right? And so those two are like, no, we need to add this in this feature, or we need to add this feature. And some of that's true, right? And the thing is, though, I like to say is like, look, you're all the way up here on the top of the curve. You're talking to people that are up on the top of the curve. Their customers already, or you already know the API, you built it, so you're already at the top of the curve. But if I can't get people up and out of that suck threshold, they're never going to get to your top of the curve. And so but that's a very hard conversation for DevRel at the getting started experience and the feeling of the documentation. I mean, if you can't nail that, you're going to have the hardest time getting, I mean, either you are giving money to people and they're using it, or they're being told to, or whatever. But if you can't get people organically above that, then you're stuck, right? The Valley of Despair, though, so there's that kick-ass curve, right? And so that's in isolation. That's actually basically if the person has never used any of these types of products before, right? So like I've never used a message bus, and I'm looking at Kafka. Great. I don't have any expertise or anything like that. The problem is if they have used a message bus before and they're all the way on the top of the kick-ass curve with the message bus, and you come in and say, forget all that, all this great feelings that you had, no, go back down to this sucky place and then go all the way back up to the curve. And that's the
You
valley of
call it
despair
different one.
between the
You
two
called this
kick-ass parts.
differently. You called it something like
You're right. It's the it's because you said valley. It's the valley of woe.
Exactly. Yes.
That's the valley of exactly. Yes. So it's the valley of woe because it's the valley between the two kick-ass parts. Yeah, because that is the developer feeling tons of negative feelings about
and you're trying to make them to do
because,
kind of like a busy work that they don't want to, and this is also often happens when the tool is actually shipped from the top. Hey, we bought new solution, just go figure this out. And this is where they need to establish their mental like knowledge that they know about the tool that they use it to the new thing. And this is like busy work that they need to do, and all this like unsettling feelings. This is where but this think this can be used as an instrument to establish kind of like how to migrate people, how to take them from one tool in one position on this kick-ass curve and move this to the another tool and they keep them on the same position. It's also kind of like a very interesting exercise. And for me, it become one of the tools that I really like to use and have a meaningful conversation specifically to product people, and why the like a quick start guide or tutorial that allows people to focus on the problem that they want to solve. Always think about what is it for them, not what you want them to do.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? What would leave you motivated using it? We have similar problems sometimes with real-time streaming in Bitewise, because people like I'm fine, I'm doing it in batches, like I don't want to bother. Sorry.
I mean, but then again, when developers come to me and say like, oh, should I use Java or should I use Python or should I use this tool or that tool? I usually start with, what do you know? Start with that, whatever you know, because the startup cost is really high. And so I think you can see examples of people trying to reduce the valley of woe. Like there's a bunch of competitors to Redis, right? And the ones that are probably most popular are the ones that mirror the Redis API and then add stuff on top of it.
You don't have to like go that far. Like talk about the Postgres. You spend like many years in the Postgres, and how many we have like a Postgres compatible tools there? Million.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, they either take the product itself or they've made the API the same thing. I mean, and it could be also things that are as simple as way back when Firefox was early in its early days. It was a long before that. This is actually when it became Firefox. They had a button on their toolbar that was import your bookmarks, which allowed you to import all of your bookmarks from IE. And so what they were basically saying is, yes, we know you have invested a lot of time and energy in collecting all these bookmarks, and to go to a new browser and to do all that work again and to remember it is terrible. We'll just take those and bring them in.
How about the key map of Eclipse for IntelliJ?
Yeah. IntelliJ has a key map for Eclipse. They have it for Vim. They have it for Emacs, right? They're like, we don't need to tell you. It's not important that you use a certain keyboard. What's important is you get your task done with our tools, so we're going to make it as easy as possible to get you going, rather than having you say, okay, relearn all the keys you use. Because that's one of those things that keeps you below the suck curve. Like you keep hitting colon, and it actually shows a colon on the screen rather than the colon that you have in Vim, where you're going to put in a command, and you're frustrated and angry, right? Yeah. So, and that it's unnecessary friction. So, I think the kick-ass curve. The more I think about it, the more it is. I mean, Kathy Sierra is brilliant. All of her stuff is brilliant. And I remember when I see this, and she broke this kick-up curve in relation to even upgrading your project. Like, oh, we redid the interface. Well, okay, if you redo the interface, you just created a valley of woe because I have to relearn where all the buttons are and all that stuff. Is it worth it? Make sure that when you upgrade something, you're not just doing it because it looks better. Right? So that's where I think she was starting.
Did everybody hate it? Just because it didn't bring anything, it was just new and frustrating because it was different.
Yeah, and it didn't. I don't feel like I've added much value, right? Like I don't see any value add. except maybe it's a little cleaner on the left side, but that was never really a big problem. And so she also would say, upgrade your user, not your product, right? Because what the user is trying to do is trying to solve a task. So they upgrade your user to make them more powerful and easier to solve the task rather than looking for your product to do that. Help teach the developer how to do that and make them higher up on the kick-ass curve. And so I think it's great for evaluating all sorts of things. It's also why I'm even more firmly believe you need to nail your, like when you start a new DevRel program, you need to nail the hello message, and it has to be no marketing speak, just what are you going to do for me? You need to have a good getting started, like your TTK measure that you were saying. So like I'm using the API and I experience success within 15, 20 minutes, depending on what it is, right? And then reference documentation. Like you cannot launch without those three things. It's good to put tutorials and all that other stuff, and those can come later. But if you haven't nailed those three things, developers are going to hate you, right? Because the getting started is the beginning of the path. Like, okay, here's where you are, and here's how you move forward. And if I have to go all over the docs, like how do I log in? How do I set up my client? Like, and if you have to go all over the docs to do that, and the thing is, it doesn't hurt established developers to have the getting started because it's just an item on the left side or a link on the front page. They just ignore it. They're like, oh yeah, I already know that. So they look at other things. It's amazing to me how many companies I have seen that do not nail their getting started. And if any company asks me for DevRel advice, I say, nail your getting started. Do you have a good getting started? That's the most important thing that you have to be able to lock down. Because otherwise it's not going to happen.
Preach.
Well,
this is the just a incredible sound of the ideas that very sweet to my ears personally.
Yeah, so with this in mind, with getting started in mind, I want to wrap up this episode. Thank you, Steve. It was amazing.
Okay, wait, before we wrap, wait, time out. Before we wrap up, I have to say one thing about metrics though, that we left out from the talk. So it is hard to get metrics, but that doesn't mean that we can just say, it's too hard to measure. We can do whatever we want to do. It is incumbent upon us as a profession to actually demonstrate value, right? Even if it's not metrics, you have to, as a profession, have to show ways in which we create value. It's not like, metrics are hard, so I can eat. It's hard to measure my cholesterol, so I can eat much butter as I want.
I think the way to do it is through very carefully crafted stories and anecdotes, making sure that people know that it's not an ROI, right? So we help throughout the entire organization, and we have those stories throughout the entire organization. Hey, we helped recruiting an amazing engineer because they came to our talk and they want now to work to our company. That's a story. It's not an ROI, but we demonstrated how we helped HR, how we kept recruiting. Hey, we made this introduction to this to someone in this organization, and they went all the way to exec, and they actually performed a top-bottom sale. But thanks to our warm introduction, we helped sales. It's not an ROI. This is not our job. This is not how we should be measured. But here is how we contributed. And obviously the same stories with marketing, with product. You see this feature everybody uses? You know who first brought it to the attention of the company? I did, because I heard it from the users in the conference, right? So those stories really help. And being stories and anecdotes, they're very different from this bad number that will actually harm you if you say, hey, my contribution to the IRR was $2,000 out of all the travels that I did last year. This is terrible. But the stories, when they are positioned as stories of how we contributed to the entire organization, might be very, very helpful in justifying our existence. There are very hard metrics with exact numbers for improvement. This activity is better than that activity, and I know it for sure because I have the numbers. But when it comes to justifying our existence, this is where we should stay away from the ROI discussion, or like the ROI demands, and instead show value, how we help the entire organization through carefully crafted stories and anecdotes. And we know how to tell stories.
That's what we're hired for. And I gave another talk at Monktober. It was at Monktoberfest about do experiments with your activities, right? Like, don't just say, like, because I'm a scientist by training. So I was saying, like, when you do an email letter, do an A/B email letter. If you start doing shows, like, you can come up with a hypothesis before the shows. Like the one we had was, if we do a bunch of shows in Philadelphia, we should see more, the Philly metro area should show more signups. And it was wrong. Like, you could see the spikes when we do the shows, and then it goes back to basically no different from the curve of the overall country, right? But there we could say, okay, so that's not a good strategy to concentrate in one metropolitan. So try to do things like that. Now I'm done.
All right. 2 lessons learned from this episode. One is getting started. Make sure this is the best thing that you like when you open, everyone understand that. And second one, developer relations is an art as well, so don't mess it with measuring by bad numbers.
ROI is a trap.
I guess something like that.
ROI is a trap. Go watch the talk. Find the
Yep.
links in the description. Likes.
Yeah, likes,
Bell.
always appreciated. Share.
Subscribe.
See you next time. Thank you.
Yeah.
And as always, we're looking for your feedback. Just write down in the comments, are you agree? What's your golden metric? Or you disagree, say like you guys don't understand what you're talking about. We're happy to this feedback and we welcome this feedback, and we're happy to talk about this in the comment section.
Unless it's about me. You don't say that I don't know what I'm talking about. I want to only hear he was great. You should have him on all the time. Gosh, I love that guy. That's the only thing I want to say.
But like, regardless what the people will say, we definitely will have Steve in another meeting, because I'm a huge fan of his work, and I think he has some great ideas that worth sharing in maybe in a new medium. We congratulate Steve with starting his new gig as a consultant, and you can find all his credentials and his the information where you can go definitely follow him on social media, and you can find all this information there. And Steve, thanks so much for finding time to talking to us.
Cheers. Thank you, Steve.
Cheers. Bye.